Welcome everybody to the University of Applied Research and Development Educators podcast. It's our honour to have with us Dr Tim Magner, who is the President of the Greater Shreveport Chamber of Commerce, and we're delighted to have him. Huge educational background, experience in EdTech and leadership. Wonderful to have you with us, Tim.
Thanks, it's delightful to be able to be with you.
You've had such a varied experience and different things that you've done and worked for the Department of Education as well and P21. So I'd just love for you to tell us how you came to be where you're at now with your certain role that you are leading.
So again, one of the things that I have found I gave a presentation to one of my kids' classes about 5 years, they were more than 5 years ago now. He was in 5th grade, so a long time ago. But I said, one of the things about my experiences has been that the only job that I had at that point and actually since that existed when I was in school was teacher. All of the other jobs that I've had have evolved in large part because technology created them, whether that's CIO or web designer or a lot of those things. And so ironically or not, I suppose, our Chamber of Commerce has been around for 100 years, 110 years. We were founded in 1910. And I was the CIO at the local medical school when this position came open. And it was really an opportunity for me to take a lot of the work that I had done in nonprofit work around the world, really, and apply it locally here. An opportunity to work with our local school districts and with our business community and really help to build and develop the kind of community that we hopefully all want to live in. And a lot of that has actually revolved around education and technology, ironically, in part because education is such a big part of economic development, and having a good school system and having places where kids can go to school for the parents who live here, but also as a workforce development component and really how we create the 21st century educational opportunities that prepare our students for the workforce of the future. So it really has been an interesting evolution. And coupling that with the idea that technology is a platform that enables us to, as I like to say, live here, work anywhere. You're in Jakarta, I'm here in Shreveport, and so the idea of being able to have a quality of life that there's no traffic here, we can live, there's affordable housing and lots of great stuff like that, and the ability for folks to literally work on projects and for organizations around the world is something that I'm really trying to encourage our community to embrace, but also encourage businesses and organizations and individuals to embrace it as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you said about 21st century learning, and we can be working anywhere and living anywhere. I know you were the executive director of P21. Do you want to just tell us about your experiences there and what drew you to the organization?
So when I in the early 2000s, I guess it was, seems like so long ago and yet just yesterday. I actually had an opportunity when I was at Microsoft to be one of the founding board members for the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. And it was, at the time, it was a radical notion that there were things that were beyond what we would think of as sort of the traditional hard skills that were critically important for young people and people of all ages really to have. And that really came out of conversations with the business community, saying that there were things like critical thinking and communication and collaboration and critical problem solving were in fact at least as important as mathematical capabilities, writing and not in place of, but that those were the skills, those were really career skills versus necessarily job skills. And so when after my tenure at Microsoft, I went to the U.S. Department of Education and ran the Office of Educational Technology for a number of years. And so when that administration ended, I had the opportunity to take over the partnership, and really, what was interesting about it at the time was the partnership had really begun as a campaign. They thought it'd be around for a couple of years and get people excited, and then they would be able to kind of go on from there. And what they ended up realizing was that it was actually a much longer process. And so I was part of the 10th anniversary, actually, when we were able to really begin to celebrate that. And at that point, the urgency was still there. I likened it to, you hear about musicians, music groups, right? They have their one hit, and it's the only thing anybody wants to hear. But it's always new to somebody. And so whenever however often we talked about the 4 C's and 21st century skills, it was always new to somebody. And yet at the same time, we recognized that it was important to move beyond just the hey, where, here's some good ideas, but actually look to see how people were implementing it. And so we were able to go around the country and identify school districts and schools and sometimes teachers who were really implementing the 21st century skills in really powerful ways, and were showing the impact that it could have. So it wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't just a bunch of cool ideas, but these were actually people who had really embedded it into, in some cases, classrooms, in some cases, schools, in some cases, whole districts, and it had really informed and fundamentally reshaped how they viewed the opportunities they were providing for students. So it was a fascinating opportunity to really explore that at scale.
Yeah, I do want to thank you for the work that you did there with the partnership. I mean, I'm from New Zealand, but the conferences that I've attended in New Zealand, Australia, watched virtually in Canada, from around the world, the research, the publications from the partnership has been really influential, and it's referenced a lot. So the work that you did there has made an international impact and has really given people inspiration and ideas. And both of those two things are fantastic. So thanks for what you did there.
Well, thank you, and I want to return the compliment, because one of the things that I was really lucky to be able to do, both with my work with SIF, the Schools Interoperability Framework, but also particularly with Microsoft and the Department of Education, was I got to travel around the world as well and visit Australia and visit New Zealand and visit places in Asia and Africa and in Europe, and really learned a lot there as well. I mean, a lot of the work that informs and one of the really exciting sort of synergies that came out of the work of the partnership was the alignment that cropped up. Again, the New Zealand department, the National Department, had put together a framework that was very similar. Again, some different language, and what we used to kid about that. Everybody wants to call it something something unique, but there was a lot of cross-geographic alignment, which was very heartening, both because it was sort of validating the work of each individual party, but that there was an emerging sort of global consensus, maybe that's too strong a word, but certainly a global recognition that these were skills that were not only critical for young people to have, but again, were really critical throughout someone's career, and could really be those differentiators, irrespective of someone's background or origin.
So we have educators, educational leaders from K-12 government schools, private schools, from Indonesia, the Philippines, Kathmandu in Nepal, also in Malta. So we're quite international in terms of our Masters of Education students. Everyone has limited time, energy, and resources. And as you said before, that when you were at school, the only job that existed was the job teacher, and the other jobs you've had didn't exist, but technology has changed things. So if educational leaders could marshal their resources, their time, their energy on a particular area of focus, what would you advise them to do?
I think when you look at other job areas, when you look at medicine is a great example. It used to be, and this is going to be an American reference, so I apologize. I don't know what the analog would be around the world, but there used to be an old television show called Marcus Welby, MD, and there was a doctor and his nurse, and they basically, would take care of people. And now you may be familiar with House, right? The Hugh Laurie production, where the doctors still do the same thing. They do diagnosis and prescription, and yet the House has so much more information inside people, labs and x-rays and CT scans and all those sorts of things. So the activity is still the same, but the technology has not only provided more information, but it has provided an entirely new set of job roles. PRNs, physician's assistants, there's a whole sort of hierarchy of people who are there to support that diagnosis and prescription activity that House does. In education, teachers design, deliver, assess, evaluate, report. The whole life cycle of instructional design, delivery, evaluation, and assessment is all still in many cases done by one individual. We haven't leveraged the technology, and consequently, we haven't created the opportunity for new job roles to emerge. It may be that I'm a great presenter, or maybe that you're a great curriculum developer. And so we miss the opportunity to really have your skill set in the curriculum development, and maybe, my presentation skills or my assessment skills. And the idea of really unpacking what it is that happens in that black box that is school could do a number of things. One, it might be able to change student-teacher ratios. And I know, especially in a lot of countries in the world, the idea of having 20 or 30 in a classroom is a gift when you're talking 60 or 70. But it's also, I think, opportunities to look at from a career path standpoint. My mother was a teacher for her entire career, and she started as a teacher and she retired as a teacher. And there was some work that she did to help mentor other teachers, but that was really, there was no career ladder for her. And I think when you look at technology mediated instruction, especially in the time of COVID, when we're looking at a lot of online instruction and things like that, being able to unpack that cycle of instructional delivery and design and assessment and evaluate report, and really determine whether there are, in fact, skill sets that are better suited toward pieces of that, maybe a teamed approach. Again, I think we haven't really unpacked that what happens inside that box that is school. We keep trying to throw stuff in the box, but we haven't tried to necessarily unpack or restructure how the box operates. And I think if teachers had that opportunity, if educators took the time to step back and say, what are we trying to do? With P21, for example, it's really about, when school was designed, it was designed because information was scarce and you needed to bring people together because you had a broadcast model. Well, today you and I can, broadcast information literally all over the world. And so what's the value of bringing age-banded cohorts of kids together for 6 to 8 hours a day? Well, some is clearly childcare. But if you take the elements of the P21 framework and you look at those types of things, getting kids to do meaningful work that it enables them to apply what they know, suddenly the idea of coming to school to be in a band, or coming to school to build a catapult, or coming to school to create and make and do, suddenly the rationale for face-to-face education is really, really strong. And so if we can flip that dynamic and be able to broadcast information out, suddenly the job roles that are required to enable students to create and make and do are very different perhaps than the ones that we've looked to teachers for in the past. And also, one of the big challenges in this country, and I know it's similar around the world, is what we pay teachers. Well, if you have a much more specialized skill, or you have a much more specialized responsibility set or a skill set, now we can look at career ladders that are perhaps more lucrative as well. So I think as you look at what happens in school, what the output of school is, right now, especially in the time of this pandemic where so much learning is going remote, it's really about information delivery. It's not necessarily about learning. And I don't want to be pedantic in making that distinction, but I think when you look at the kinds of things that we want students to be able to do, ultimately, it's not be able to you give them 100 questions and then you give them the 101st question and they were able to answer it. It's really about, you give them 100 questions and then you present them with a question they've never seen before, and they have to take all of that information and apply it. That's certainly what we're all trying to figure out now with this pandemic, right? There's no answers in the back of the book about what we're supposed to do. And I think if we look at unpacking what happens in schools, making it be more about create and make and do, and then restructure the job roles around that, I think we can create really exciting instructional delivery models. You can create new staffing and hiring models, and you can in fact reinvigorate the value of the face-to-face school environment in a very technology-mediated construct.
Wow, that's a big challenge and a complete shift in the way that schools would operate, in the way that they're led, in the way that they are staffed and developed, and what happens with students. That's going to be challenging for us to wrestle with in our master's class.
Well, and I have every confidence that your students will be the ones who figure out the mechanisms to do that. There was an interesting dynamic there's a school a number of years ago I think it was in Minnesota, where they had created the school hierarchy much more like you would have a law firm, where instead of having sort of a pyramid, you had more of a sort of a network effect. And what it did was it enabled a collaborative creativity model rather than a sort of a didactic hierarchical model. And I think as you look at especially smaller school environments, I think this is particularly true in rural areas, I think there are ways to begin to tinker with the opportunities to provide new instructional delivery models. Even in large systems, you can have these pilot projects. I think if we begin to really tease apart the opportunities here, we can find those things that are ultimately successful and begin to scale or begin to replicate them. And I think parents, especially now, as a consequence of, in some cases, of having to actually teach their children at home, they understand now how hard it is to be a teacher, many of them, the opportunity to really look at, I think many parents would be hungry for the opportunity to create opportunities for their children to do things differently, to be part of that exploration and that engagement in a way that is ultimately different than what they've had in the past.
So you've done your master's at Harvard, fantastic school, your doctorate at Pepperdine, great university. I've studied at Auckland University, completing my PhD now, New Zealand's best university. How challenged are we in our formal education system and the way that we credential it and, I guess, recognise achievement? How challenged is the model that you and I have come through compared with where things are going? Do you think that the two coexist and what happens inside the box is just a little bit different in the future?
No, I think there's two, and again, I can only really speak from the U.S. perspective on this particular point. But one of the challenges that we've really been saddled with is what is a push toward what I would call sort of anti-intellectualism. This idea of the flattening of expertise. On the internet, everyone has an opinion and everyone could be a dog, right? I mean, it's this idea that all opinions are equal, and as long as I have a platform, I have a Twitter handle, or I have a blog, my opinion is as valid as everyone else's. And so I think the value of expertise, the critical nature of it, the expertise as the culmination of a set of study, I think has become undervalued. I think at the same time, there's a lot of push toward, again, particularly in our country, toward completion and certificates and sort of, checking the box and getting it done. And as a consequence, I think we run the risk of losing something when it comes to the dynamic of the educational experience. Again, go back to the K-12 model I talked about just a moment ago. I think when you look at the experiential component of education, and I make a distinction here between instructional or information delivery, training, and education. Education, I think the distinction from my perspective is it folds back on itself, right? I'm growing through processing and applying what I know. So if we don't have the opportunity to do that in some cases a rarefied form, like with your doctoral program or a master's program, where you don't have an opportunity to truly wrestle with the ideas, not just the information, but the ideas, and you actually work toward creating new knowledge. I think we're as a people, as a global community, we will be the poorer for it. Because unless we wrestle with what we know, put it through the ringer, and then discount what doesn't work, validate what does, and create new knowledge, we run the risk of never being satisfied with what we have informationally. The idea at its most reductive is if we had 10 world-class teachers and we had them teach algebra on YouTube, we would be done with school. It's just about sit down in front of and watch Sal Khan or watch whomever teach that information. But it's more than that. And so what I worry about, particularly in higher education, is this push toward applicability, job applicability, this idea that you go to college to get a job. That's true. But when you think about the jobs that exist today, the job that I went to college for doesn't, has been superseded. And the jobs that I've had, I didn't go to college for. And so what I like to think was most valuable about that experience was the creativity, learning to deal with people, coming up with new ideas, struggling, all of those pieces, which I think need to be part of that educational experience. And as the model I alluded to earlier, they need to start much younger, because students, when they get to where we are today, if we're talking about dealing with climate change, or we're talking about artificial intelligence, or we're talking about going to Mars, or we're talking about viral pandemics, there are no answers in the back of the book. We need students who can create, who can think creatively, and who can problem solve in ways that take limited amounts of information and apply them broadly. And I think if we discount expertise, if we undercut the value of application of knowledge, not just collection of information, then we do ourselves a disservice by dismantling the institutions that have brought us this far. When we think about the university, when we think about Oxford and Cambridge, or the places around the world that have been the fonts of knowledge and experience, they have been the seeds for ideas that have gotten us this far. We need to preserve that opportunity and recognize that it is an opportunity, but do our best to expand that opportunity through technology, through different kind of delivery models, but in a way that ultimately values the knowledge creation component and the public good that comes from it.
I love that. Protect the opportunity, but expand the opportunity. That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, Tim, just in the last couple of minutes that we have, for our aspiring leaders, those who are looking to be principals, directors, maybe set up their own school or shift into another area, what's some career advice or experiences that you would encourage them to have? Teach.
I think, for anyone who wants to be an instructional leader or wants to be an organizational leader, I think having experience on the front lines is essential. It gives you empathy, it gives you exposure, and it gives you the kind of credible understanding of the other side of the desk, if you will. And that may not necessarily be in a formal context, but again, so I think every educational leadership opportunity pathway should have a chance to stand in front of a classroom and know what it's like, and answer questions from kids who think they're smarter than you, and whatever. I think that's an important piece. But I also think that it is, there are two kinds of models. There's the sort of heads down, which is looking at what you're doing, sort of managing your own environment. And I think our higher education institutions have done a serviceable job of preparing leaders in that context. What I don't know that they've done as good a job in is what I call the heads up, especially now when you're an instructional leader and you're an educational leader. There is so much going on in the world today. And so being aware, increasing your situational awareness about where your students are going to end up, or where your students could end up, because I think the opportunity to re-embed those experiences for students is key, but also for practitioners. Look for externships for your teachers, look for opportunities to embed teachers in the workplace of today, because it's very different in many respects than what they've grown up in. And especially from a technology standpoint, in many places, It's very different from the way school functions. And so it's really getting that, grounding on the one hand and that strategy on the other. The other piece, and I had an opportunity to spend some time at one of our military colleges recently. And what was really fascinating to me was the recognition on the part of the individuals who are moving from tactical delivery to strategic management. And it's the difference between being a stick catcher and a stick thrower, right? And I think what that shift from heads down to heads up occasions, it requires a different perspective and brings with it different burdens. And I think for our leaders to recognize that there's a difference between management and leadership. It's not leadership if nobody follows. And that as a consequence, being able to understand that your job really is to mediate those two perspectives, is to care for, provide direction, and nurturing for the folks under your control or your stewardship, but also then to be the heads up to make sure that the direction that you're steering your ship of state or school, whatever, is you're avoiding the rocks and things like that. And I think more unfortunately, folks tend to get stuck either in heads down or heads up. And I think modulating between the two is really key. And so if you're the folks who are aspiring to that, take that with them and recognize that there really is that dual responsibility, then I think that may help them on both sides, both empathize and sort of manage downward, but also be able to manage upward and really take advantage of the opportunities that exist out there in the world to bring the world into their schools so their schools can be embedded back in the world.
Lovely. Dr. Tim, thank you so much for your time tonight. I appreciate you giving it to us.
Hey, I'm delighted, and good luck. I'd love to speak with you again if the opportunity arises.